Jesus ended sin, not evil. There's understanding that we all have to have if we want to know what the Bible is saying. Evil existed before sin came. There was a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? I'm not saying it was an actual tree. I've got that in other videos. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that was before mankind fell into sin. So it existed, and what mankind was told, don't eat of this, or they would know, they would be like gods and know good and evil. People already had good and evil before sin ever existed. And mankind fell into sin and received the knowledge of good and evil. Because then there's a difference. It put enmity. Whenever they fell into sin, they were robed in a cursed ground. He put skins on them of the cursed ground. They were robed in flesh, decaying, dying flesh. And there was enmity between the flesh and the spirit, between the serpent seed and Eve's seed, which was originally spiritual. Right? That's why it said sin was condemned in the flesh. Jesus Christ had to be lifted up the way that the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness by Moses. And if he did that, he would draw men unto him, right? He had to be lifted up. He was talking about the death that he would die. He had to crucify the flesh as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness. Since mankind obeyed Satan's words to make this flesh, that flesh became Satan's. That's why there was enmity between the flesh and the spirit. There was enmity between the woman's seed and Satan's seed. That was a battle in every single person. But as Satan ruled the flesh, nobody could enter heaven because sin could not enter heaven or go back to the presence of God. And it never said that Jesus Christ would end evil. It said he appeared once in the end of the world to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. To anyone that looked for him, he appeared again a second time without sin unto salvation. And that's what you see in Revelation chapter 12. Jesus is born, Jesus ascends, there's war in heaven, Michael and the angels fight against the dragon against the angels. The dragon draws a third part of the stars and casts them to the earth, and then the great dragon and the serpent, the devil, is cast down. And then is come salvation. He said he would appear again a second time without sin unto salvation. What you're reading in the Bible, they still had sin. But once Jesus returned, sin was over. And then they had salvation. That's why whenever Satan was cast down, then it says, now has come salvation, the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of the brethren is cast down, and rejoice you that are in heaven. Because it wasn't until Satan was cast down that the resurrection of the dead could happen, and they could go up into heaven. Because the accuser of the brethren, which accused them day and night, meaning always, constantly, because they were robed in flesh, they were robed in sin. Once Jesus returns, he ends sin. He ended it, so that they could enter heaven. What cast them out of the presence of God? Sin. What was the punishment for sin? The grave. Once he ended that, that's why it said sin was condemned in the flesh. That's why David, pleading with the Lord, said, I am shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Just being born was a sin. The seed itself was a sin. And yes, Jesus already returned, but he didn't end evil, he ended sin. Now there's no more sin, so we have no more grave. The repercussion for sin was, in the day that they ate of it, they would surely die. They didn't die that day. They had the grave to look forward to that day. And they couldn't enter back into the presence of God. They slept in darkness. Once Jesus returned, he ended that sin. Right? He gave them the Holy Spirit back then to keep them from sin until his return. But once he returned, he ended that sin. So now, O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? Now we don't sleep in darkness, but we see a light whenever we die, because we can go straight into heaven whenever we die. But he didn't end evil. He ended what's accustomed to the flesh, what's accustomed to this cursed ground. What we eat, what we drink, what we wear, who we sleep with, what we listen to, what we watch, those things do not matter. None of that matters. None of that can make you any better than somebody else at all. And if you don't judge people for those things, then you won't do anything evil. You can't murder somebody unless you judge their flesh to be worse than yours first. You know, you can't murder their flesh. You're not murdering their spirit. You can only hurt their flesh. But that doesn't matter because sin is over. And you shouldn't hurt anybody, you know. You've got no reason to unless you judge them first. And think that you're better or worse than they are because of what you do in this flesh, and reject everything that Jesus did who ended sin. You can't steal from somebody unless you think your life or your children are more important than theirs, unless you judge their flesh. You can't have violence unless you're judging somebody's flesh for the lust that they have in their flesh that you also have, you know. Makes you a hypocrite. The truth of life today is not to judge anybody for sin, because Jesus ended that sin, not evil. He made a reconciliation for their past iniquity, but he ended sin. It said he would make an end of sins and a reconciliation for iniquity. He appeared once in the end of the world to put away sin. Behold the Lamb that took away the sins of the whole world. Not just their sins only, but for the sins of the whole world, John said. Now, blood cannot cover a spirit. Whenever Jesus died, he overcame that sin for every single person. But the Pharisees were not saved because they didn't believe that he overcame sin. They thought it was still through their own flesh righteousness. They thought they could still do it, so they weren't saved. Jesus' blood covered the flesh. Blood cannot cover a spirit. If you try to pour blood on a spirit, it goes right through it. They had evil spirits, and most people today have evil spirits. And that is because they judge one another for the flesh. And if we don't do that, we would be living in God's covenant today. Not what was in the Bible, but what God has for us today. We would be living in that. But everybody's pride, jealousy, and rage gets in the way. And they can't understand that Jesus ended sin and not evil. Evil existed before sin ever entered, like I proved in the beginning of the video, and evil will always exist. There will always be a choice. There will always be free will. There will be many ages to this world. If you want to live for God today, we don't do it through reading books with the flesh. We don't do it through having a Holy Spirit to keep us from sin. We do it through being honest. Since we know that sin is over, we have nothing to lie about. Were you looking at that girl? Yes, I was. Were you thinking this? Yes, I was. Did you watch this? Yes, I did. They're doing the same stuff in their own flesh lust, So don't lie to anybody about anything. There's no point to it. And then you'll be honest. Then you'll know God. Then you will accept what Jesus accomplished. You will be living the way that God intends for us today. Subscribe, check out my description. I live off of support. I get nothing unless people send it. I'll have ways to support down there. I'll have links to my books on Amazon. Share this video, share my videos with people. Let's spread the truth, get people to the truth. I'll continue making videos to explain who God is today, what he shows today, and fix everything that Christians have lied about in the Bible. Thanks.